Hey guys, Kinoflex here, and today we're going to be covering a certain music critic by the name of Mr. Anthony Fantano. But instead of responding to one of his music reviews that he's well known for, we're going to be looking at one of his movie reviews because I thought it was pretty bad, and a lot of other people seem to agree. The film he talks about is A24's Marty Supreme, directed by Josh Safdie, and it's a film I personally found to be incredible. I've always considered myself to be a fan of the Safdie brothers' unique brand of storytelling as they've shown previously with Good Time and Uncut Gems. And even though Benny Safdie didn't collaborate with his brother on this film to work on his own film The Smashing Machine, Josh Safdie nonetheless hit it out of the park once again with Marty Supreme by utilizing elements of his previous films in the form of non-stop tension through a masterfully written script, excellent use of non-professional actors to deliver more authentic performances, a beautiful score from One-Tricks Point Never that completely immerses you into the world of the film, and a talented leading actor able to play a complex character who captures your attention from beginning to end, all the while remaining distinct enough from what came before it to be its own rewarding standalone experience. And for accomplishing that, I consider it to be my favorite film of 2025. So I'm honestly perplexed by critics such as Fantano decrying it as not only one of the worst films of 2025, but of the decade as well.
Marty as a character is a deeply boring, sniveling little fuck. Even though there have been some recent Timothy Chalamet films I haven't necessarily been crazy about, be it the Wonka movie or even the Dylan biopic, I still went into Marty Supreme with pretty high hopes, but came out massively disappointed and personally thought it was one of the most overinflated pieces of crap I've seen this decade so far.
Bitch, are you for real?
I'm more than happy to criticize or hear out other criticisms of a popular film, especially if it suffers from egregious problems related to its plot. But the primary problem Fantano has with Marty Supreme is that it made him upset to follow an unheroic protagonist without the film going out of its way to lecture the audience that what he was doing was bad. Which is pretty silly and overly emotional if you ask me. And he's not doing himself any favors by being insufferably smug and pretentious.
For months now, there have been some kind of funny rumors proliferating online that Timothy Chalamet and SD Kid are one in the same, and this essentially was kind of a cute, funny way to play into the rumors, but also dispel them at the same time. And of course, Timothy used this as an opportunity to further promote Marty Supreme, and talk about how his dick is young and restless in some bars that aren't exactly up to snuff. If I could start with my broadest critique, I would say that this movie really has no inner dialogue whatsoever, very little in the way of any subtext.
What do you mean by that?
Saying that the film doesn't have any subtext is wild considering I found a lot of it to chew on all throughout. Particularly the aspects relating to how we treat our loved ones for granted for personal benefit, as well as processing generational trauma after a horrific historical tragedy of gigantic proportions. This goes without saying, but this is a really Jewish movie. Not simply because the most prominent characters are Jews, but because the film takes place in 1952, meaning the Holocaust was just 7 years ago. If you were a Jew living during this time, you weren't just struggling in America, you were struggling on a global scale because beyond the millions of deaths to deal with, there was also widespread confiscation of generational wealth and property, which forced Jews like Marty into the very bottom of the socioeconomic hierarchy, where they had to gradually work their way up to regain what was unfairly taken from them. But rebuilding their communities is easier said than done because not only do they have to deal with various types of people honing in on their struggles to exploit or kick them while they're down, but individual freedoms also took a massive hit under themselves since younger Jews were given less opportunities to do what they personally wanted in favor of contributing to the collective survival of their people. This is why Marty has such a massive chip on his shoulder. He had no control over the unfair circumstances he found himself in, and wanted to regain control over his life while building his community back up on his own terms. And by itself, that's an incredibly admirable motivation to have, which gives him enough depth to prevent him from being a one-dimensional character. But Marty strays from the path of being an admirable underdog in favor of accomplishing his dreams in ruthless fashion. And we're given glimpses of his ruthless nature before he spends the majority of the film scamming people through the use of subtext that Fantano thinks is non-existent. For starters, let's look at his relationship with Gwyneth Paltrow's character Kay Stone. What draws Marty to Kay isn't her beauty, but her wealth and social status because he perceives her as a resource he can directly benefit from, either monetarily or personally by satisfying his own self-worth. But because she's a resource, once she stops providing Marty with any of those things, he loses Eddie and all desire towards her. And that pretty much describes all of his relationships throughout the film too. If you're providing him with something, you're his friend. But if you're not, then you're insignificant to him. Another great example of subtext is his character being contrasted with that of his friend from Hungary who survived the Holocaust. His friend is someone who plays ping pong for the love of the sport, who keeps his ego in check unlike Marty, but is older, has more life experience, and is just more willing to go out of his way to actually help other people, as demonstrated with the honey scene, where he kept other concentration camp prisoners alive. Marty, on the other hand, is young, compulsive, and unwilling to acknowledge the lives of other people around him. A great scene of him displaying this mentality is him gifting his mother with a piece of an Egyptian pyramid under the justification that Jews built that, so he has a right to it. But really, all he did was partially destroy something beautiful his ancestors built for himself. There's a lot more subtle moments that can be found, but you get the point.
So yeah, going into this movie, the message, believe me, is not like, get inspired, be determined, hone a talent, and then one day you can dream big and be at the top of the world. No, the message is more like, hey, if you didn't know, you could basically force and riz your way through any situation so long as you're coercive enough and callous enough to just push people into the things you want them to do. Marty Supreme never forces Marty to reckon with his bad behavior, his evil ways, through either an inner dialogue or voice or any kind of serious consequences for his actions. Actually, the plot and characters in this movie just straight up reward Marty for 2 hours as he develops into a shittier and shittier person. When I say shitty, I truly do mean shitty. Again, what makes this movie awful isn't just that Marty is a bad guy, it's that the film itself and the progression of events essentially okays this behavior and says, yeah, that's fine. If you just like repeatedly act this way forever, it'll all work out.
Are you retarded?
Once again, this is just another really bizarre takeaway. For some reason, the film has become an unintentional litmus test for a viewer's emotional intelligence, because there are some people like Fantano who are actually walking away from it thinking that it endorses the actions of Marty when it's in fact a cautionary tale that showcases the consequences of behaving like him. Marty's efforts to play against Endo again as a matter of regaining his pride is him short-sightedly dedicating all this time and effort into something which he really shouldn't be, and leaving a trail of destruction for no good reason. It's like being forced to watch someone continuously make the wrong decisions over and over again, with you powerless to change the outcome even if you know how everything will turn out. Fantano's problem seems to be that the film doesn't give Marty a more straightforward ending where he unambiguously lost by losing against Endo, or perhaps dying as a consequence for his actions like what happened to Howard in Uncut Gems. But you don't necessarily need the film to kill a character off to show that they're in the wrong. In the case of Marty Supreme, the nature of Marty's actions and the way in which they are portrayed tells you intuitively that what he's doing is wrong. Not to mention, he is punished for his actions. Halfway through the movie, his entire life starts to collapse around him. He nearly dies, and he ends up groveling and humiliated in order to get what he wants to go to Japan, only to continue being unable to compete professionally in the World Championships again. Instead of Marty Supreme ending on a positive note like It's a Wonderful Life, where the main character's life suddenly takes a turn for the better after learning a life-changing lesson, it ends with him learning this lesson too late by breaking into tears, realizing that the world doesn't simply revolve around him now that he has a son to take care of. And I found it to be a significantly darker ending compared to Good Time and Uncut Gems, because while the characters in those films also meet tragic ends, there's at least a positive outcome of the harmful cycles they were perpetuating no longer continuing. But we don't really get that from Marty Supreme. Instead, we get the impression that things are going to become even worse for Marty and his family, since again, with the lack of opportunities available to him, it means he'll have to rely on the same cycle of behavior that got him into the situation he now finds himself in. At this point, I've voiced my main gripes with Fantano's criticisms, but he makes some other smaller points that also annoyed me, which I'm going to address as well.
And the table tennis scenes themselves, while they are some of the most interesting moments in the movie, the way they're shot and edited does kind of lack a certain level of intimacy. I mean, they're about as engrossing as the ping pong scenes from Forrest Gump, which are fine and fun for sure, but also very low stakes because the entire movie isn't riding on them per se. However, Marty Supreme is riding on these moments, which is why I felt disheartened by this feeling that I was tired of seeing Marty's narcissistic ass on the screen by the time we hit the final match.
Throughout his review, Fantano takes jabs at the film for not giving enough attention to ping pong, arguing that it makes the actual scenes of them playing ping pong feel underwhelming or lackluster, explaining that even when Marty wins, there's no satisfaction. But there being no satisfaction in Marty's victory is entirely the point. because he completely self-sabotaged himself in order to get it, which made it entirely meaningless.
While Marty is obviously super talented, he's also a stupid fuck, manipulative enough to get everyone around him to do exactly what he wants them to do by sheer riz alone, but too stupid to strategize well enough to make any of these manipulations benefit him in any meaningful way. Because even when Marty does get what he wants at the end of the movie, the win is hollow because he went about attaining it in the stupidest way possible. Like, if he's going to be this outwardly unlikable, could he at least also be smart beyond compare or conniving? Anything that would lead me to believe the other characters would actually just go along with anything he wants them to do outside of, just him being the main character. And if we all just say no to him, the movie kind of stops.
The reason why Marty is able to take advantage of people so well is because he has the intelligence to identify other people's weaknesses and insecurities to get them to do what he wants. He takes advantage of people in an unhappy marriage wanting to feel young again. He takes advantage of people who don't have any friends. He takes advantage of people who are completely broke. He takes advantage of people who are in great physical pain. He takes advantage of people's good nature. He even takes advantage of people who are hopelessly in love with him. In all of his interactions, there is sufficient justification given as to how he is able to manipulate all of these people into doing what he wants.
Honestly, if you want to see a bunch of unlikable white characters competing against each other in a sport for all the wrong reasons, you can literally just watch Challengers. It's right there, and not only do you get Zendaya, but also a better utilization of your soundtrack star in the film, and much more well-shot competition scenes. The sweat, those close-ups, the tennis balls, some of the scenes in that film are very well shot, which I cannot say the same for, again, the ping pong scenes in Marty Supreme.
I find this comparison to Challengers completely ridiculous because in that movie, it's all centered around a tennis match that's happening from beginning to end, with flashbacks showing you what makes this specific match so important to the players. So of course it's going to have an increased amount of attention placed onto it.
And while Marty as a character does have interesting baseline characteristics, like the fact that he is an internationally competitive ping pong player, we get no sense of how he came to this talent, how he maintains it, and he puts no real value on it himself throughout the movie. Again, he barely works at any point to hone it, and he thinks nothing of cheapening it for the worst kind of short-term gain. Also, never at any point does Marty display a love or obsession with ping pong or the intricacies of the sport. He only seems to care about it to the extent that he can leverage it to inflate his ego.
The reason for why ping pong feels as though it's taking a backseat in the story is because just like Marty's personal relationships, he doesn't actually care about the sport beyond what he can gain from it since it's just a means to an end for him. Marty is obsessed with playing Endo again, but the film itself communicates that it isn't that big of a priority, especially with what he had to sacrifice in order to have that rematch. Regardless of the outcome, Marty's life will still remain broken beyond repair.
As far as the progression of the movie goes, what progression? This film is actually more like ping pong than it is about ping pong. What I mean by that is I feel like we're kind of just getting aggressively smacked back and forth from one scene to the next as we move from random side quests to self-imposed injury or challenge that even though Marty does suffer a little bit for being a moron here and there, he just kind of overcomes the difficulty instantly for no reason.
So outside of him saying that Marty overcomes the difficulties he faces instantly, since I have no idea what he's referring to, Fantano is pretty much spot on in saying that the movie feels like a high-stakes ping-pong match. But why exactly is that a bad thing? That also describes Challengers, except instead of ping-pong, it's tennis. So if you're going to praise one film for having that as its plot structure, why would you hold it against another film for having one that's outright the same?
And not only is there never a moment where he stops to think about his actions, but also he's never really told no either, or he never hears a no that he doesn't instantaneously turn into a yes, even when he's being a total scoundrel and obviously spouting BS.
But he does get told no at several points of the film. He gets told no by his uncle, which causes him to go on the run from the cops. He gets told to get out of his friend's house once he realized that he was manipulating him, and loses his chance to play ping pong professionally by the organizers of the Ping Pong World Championship. These are incredibly major plot points that contradict what Fantano is saying.
On top of it, there's all this random shit that doesn't really add that much to the main plot points of the film. Like, oh, we're falling through the floor.
That scene is what introduces Marty to the old mobster guy whose dog and money he steals. It's not unnecessary at all.
Oh, crazy, Marty's eating pussy now, he's Marty the Munch. And while I did like Gwyneth Paltrow in the movie quite a bit, if you actually cut everything out related to her subplot from the movie, it actually wouldn't take that much away from his like progression and asshole behavior and what ultimately ends up happening at the end of the movie.
Marty munching on Gwyneth Paltrow's pussy is incredibly important for the climax, because without her, Marty can't get into Kevin O'Leary's home to convince him to let him play the match against Endo, which is Marty's entire goal.
The only true bit of comeuppance that Marty sees throughout the entire movie comes at the hands of Kevin O'Leary. Yes, that Kevin O'Leary.
This is fantastic news, and of course I applaud it. What can be wrong with this?
Really?
Who essentially saunters into this film to play himself, which is ironic given that there is like kind of a line that Gwyneth Paltrow delivers that is sort of a shot at the idea of method acting at one point, and yet you hired a capitalist dipshit to play a capitalist dipshit, and I guess paid this man to come on set and deliver some Shark Tank vibes. Except on an actual episode of Shark Tank, Kev probably wouldn't be convinced by Marty's bullshit and would not invest.
So regardless of Kevin O'Leary's controversial comments, this criticism from Fantano is once again completely unfair because he's not evaluating the actual performance Kevin O'Leary gave. He's just complaining about him being casted in the movie at all because he hates his guts. And while he's personally welcome to feel however he wants towards whoever he wants, Kevin O'Leary nonetheless gave a solid performance as a non-professional actor. All Fantano did was share his bias towards him, which is pretty poor conduct to see from a professional critic making a review, since the job of a critic should be to give a fair assessment of what they're covering. Another thing he said was that the film is hypocritical for casting Kevin O'Leary to play himself, but at the same time criticizes method acting. And I'm just wondering what the hell he's even talking about, because if someone plays an exaggerated version of themselves for a role, then they're not method acting. That's like saying Larry David is a method actor in Curb Your Enthusiasm for playing himself. Fantano is just throwing out terms he doesn't even understand.
But yeah, I genuinely feel like the moral of this film is just be as impulsive and as stupid as you can possibly be, and it'll just be all cool. Don't worry. And Marty, even though he's like a massive piece of shit repeatedly, like at numerous points over and over and over, he's like still a good guy with a heart of gold. Look at him. When he sees his own son through the glass at the hospital, he cries. Meanwhile, me, after watching what he had done for the past 2 hours, I'm thinking, that kid is fucked. His dad's gonna run out on him.
And you know what? That is very much a possibility given what we're shown of Marty. But that's also the point, as I've discussed before. The ending isn't redeeming Marty. At most, it gives him a wake-up call of what he's done to pursue his dream to try and go down a path of redemption, while leaving us, the audience, pondering over our own dreams and how we should dream bigger to ensure that nobody needlessly suffers as avoidable collateral damage. And personally, I find that to be a beautiful message. And that's really everything I wanted to get off my chest. My response to him was probably a bit scattered considering I addressed different parts of his video out of order based on what I found to be the most important to the least important. But throughout his review, Fantano never really says anything that goes beyond him clutching his pearls and being personally offended. Overall, I would say that Melonhead never really gave Marty Supreme a chance, which is unfortunate because I found that it has a lot to both say and take away from it. He should probably stick to talking about music, because the passion he has for movies is pretty non-existent if you ask me. But hey, those are just my thoughts. And if you have any of your own, feel free to flex them off in the comments below. And if you enjoyed the video, be sure to leave a like, share, and subscribe. Thank you.